Hey everyone, thanks for your time. This past week was a week of mixed messages. There was a symbolic image of progress for NASA's SLS program, with the visual of two engine sections being processed at the Kennedy Space Center, but simultaneously with the publication of that information, the space agency spoke about but wouldn't clarify the situation with Artemis II. NASA provided a little new information about the Orion base heat shield investigation at a couple of industry conferences during the past week, but representatives declined to answer questions about findings or decisions, so we're still standing by to learn more. They did say they might be ready to announce something by the end of the year, but this extra time it is taking to make the heat shield decision suggests that the Artemis II schedule is also sliding with that. In this video, I'll go over both sides of the mixed messaging, beginning with the Orion heat shield update and how that changes the understanding of the Artemis II situation. There's now more work being planned in the meantime on the flight and ground hardware, while on standby for a new big picture plan. I'll go over that and also cover the expansion of Boeing's SLS assembly and test operations at KSC, with one worksite reaching capacity and the other worksite about to be activated. NASA officials in the Exploration Directorate provided a high-level update on the Artemis II situation this past week at a couple of industry conferences. It was reported that at the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group annual meeting in Houston, Lori Glaze, Acting Deputy Associate Administrator of NASA's Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, said that a root cause for the unexpected Orion base heat shield behavior during the Artemis I reentry was found. This was reiterated at the American Astronautical Society's Von Braun Space Exploration Symposium in Huntsville by Lakeisha Hawkins, who is the Assistant Deputy Associate Administrator of the Moon to Mars Program Office within the same Exploration Directorate. A few process details were provided. Glaze said additional testing was in work that would be completed by the end of November, and then there would be more deliberations. Hawkins added that they hope to be able to update plans by the end of the year. But they also declined on behalf of the space agency to elaborate or provide any technical details about the root cause when asked. It was said that, quote-unquote, it'll all come out, but the question in terms of an eventual announcement and public briefing is, will NASA take the necessary time to do that? Will they take the time to explain the root cause, go over all the details, and address all the questions? Last time they did not. The last media briefing on Artemis is almost 10 months ago, on January 9th, when delays were announced to Artemis II and III. It was only the third media briefing since Artemis I. There were briefings on March 7th and August 8th of 2023, and the one in January. The briefing in January attempted to cover similarly complicated ground. NASA provided an overview of two Orion issues above and beyond the base heat shield issue and took a limited number of questions. In that case, they did not cover all that ground at the time of the briefing. It took another 2 months to go into some of the details. We'll see if more time is provided whenever the next media briefing is held. NASA has provided some updates on Orion assembly and test status via public affairs. September 2025 is the current target launch date, and that was recently reaffirmed. However, it's not just SpaceX that has an out-of-date roadmap. Most of the Artemis II milestones and schedules from the summertime are out of date. Exploration Ground Systems was planning to get the go-ahead to start stacking the Artemis II vehicle in September, and that was also about when Orion was going to be handed over to EGS. But NASA hasn't updated the roadmap of Artemis II milestones. If stacking is on standby until the heat shield decision, then that might not be until the end of the year. Orion Final Assembly still has outstanding testing and hardware deliveries too. PAO said that the flight batteries that are being modified to handle the extreme edges of the abort load envelope are still at the vendor. A forecast a couple of months ago was that it would take a couple of months. Right now, it's unclear when those will return to Kennedy Space Center for reinstallation. But there's still a decent chunk of final assembly left on Orion, so it may not be ready for handover to EGS until New Year's too. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson recently said Artemis II was on schedule. But that's hard to reconcile given these multi-month delays in major milestones without some guidance from NASA about schedules and margins. Glaze was also quoted as saying that NASA already knows, quote-unquote, what needs to be done about future missions. There are a couple of takeaways from that. One is that the additional testing is working on flight rationale for Artemis II, which has the same Artemis I heat shield design. That would mean that NASA is still pursuing the option to fly Artemis II as is with the 4-person astronaut flight crew. The other takeaway is the implication, or the inference, that NASA has already decided something, namely corrective actions for the Artemis III heat shield. As I've noted more than once over the past few weeks, a heat shield with the same Artemis I heat shield design was assembled for Artemis III. NASA is not saying anything further than this, but given they did say they have found the root cause and know what needs to be done beyond Artemis II, I would infer that they have designed, implemented, and tested fixes and have made the decision to build the next heat shield unit with those modifications. In the Government Accounting Office's annual assessment of major NASA projects, which was released in June, they reported, quote, according to officials, NASA officials, analysis indicated that the permeability of the material, the AVCOAT material, was lower than their models had indicated. For Artemis II, officials said the current investigation is evaluating flight trajectories with the new heat shield modeling to determine if this will be sufficient to address this issue. Officials said an option for Artemis III and beyond may be to modify their manufacturing process to increase and optimize the permeability in heat shield materials, unquote. This is also a signal, although not necessarily a strong signal, that NASA continues to press the Artemis schedule as much as they can. It's not clear what the lead time is to produce a new heat shield unit, and it is possible that needing to build a new one became a critical path item for delivery of the Artemis III Orion spacecraft. The official target launch date for Artemis III is less than 2 years from now, and the Orion for that would be needed many months beforehand, which means delivery is probably needed less than 18 months from now. So it does sound like NASA has made at least one of the Orion-based heat shield decisions, but they haven't explicitly said so. I asked about the status of the Artemis III heat shield a couple of weeks ago, so eventually we'll see how the agency responds to that. Another takeaway is just an update on the timing of Artemis II stacking. If there's no decision until the end of the year, then stacking would not begin until no earlier than the end of the year. The flip side of that is if we were to see stacking begin without any announcement of an Artemis II heat shield decision, that would be a strong indication of at least some choices being made. So, given the executive level summary of the situation that we were given, but not given much more color about details and other considerations, here's where things seem to be within those limits. The Artemis II parts to the Orion-based heat shield decision are now closer to the end of the year, which is now only 2 months away. Testing to inform flight rationale could take up a month of that time. We're watching to see when Orion assembly and test is completed and the spacecraft is handed over to EGS. A second round of vacuum testing was forecast for November, and we're also waiting to see or hear about the status of the modified batteries. Both of those are critical to finishing assembly and test. If the heat shield decision is closer to New Year's, that suggests that the stacking checkpoint meeting would follow after that. But it's not clear how hard a rule that is. Stacking itself won't begin until after the checkpoint meeting, and at this point, it seems like that will wait until closer to New Year's, or maybe after the holidays in January. We don't have updated dates for those major milestones, but given those executive summary items, it does increase the uncertainty and doubt about the September 2025 target launch date. The recent GAO report spoke about the schedule margins for September trending to 0, and the question right now does seem to be, how long is this next Artemis II delay going to be? There was also a good set of visual updates on SLS Core Stage assembly and processing at Kennedy Space Center. NASA KSC Public Affairs posted still images taken on either side of last weekend showing the installation of breakover and lift ground support equipment on the front of the Artemis II Core Stage, while it lies in the transfer aisle of the vehicle assembly building. This is another activity that strongly suggests that Artemis II stacking has moved towards the end of the year, and mating the core stage to the SLS boosters is delayed into 2025. A lift spider, which had been installed in a transportation integration fixture, or TIF, was installed on the upper or forward flange of the core stage 2 forward skirt. That is a strong hint that a stage lift is planned in the next few weeks. However, instead of Artemis II stacking, it looks like the stage will first be installed in the new vertical platforms and tooling in VAB High Bay 2. A couple of stills taken on Friday, October 25th, show the TIF being positioned to bolt the spider to the front of the stage. We can see that the weather cover was removed. Then, another still taken on Monday, October 28th, shows the installed spider with the TIF moved out of view. We can see High Bay 2 in the background with some of the blue Futuramic tooling visible through the VAB structure. In the interview with NASA's manager of the SLS Stage's Element Office, Steve Wofford, on October 24th, I asked about work opportunities on the stage in High Bay 2. We're obviously waiting to hear what the choice is for Artemis II, sort of the Artemis II integration schedule. And so I know Core Stage 2 is kind of waiting for that. But I also know that Futuramic is working to build out the platforms in High Bay 2. And so is there a possibility, if you guys end up with a little bit more dwell time, that you'll use Core Stage 2 to do fit checks in High Bay 2? And then anything else you can give me in terms of like what other type of work you're going to be doing on Core Stage 2 while it's waiting for mate to the boosters?
So first of all, the Boeing and Futuramic teams have done a remarkable job on the High Bay 2 tooling, and it's really been proceeding just like clockwork. It's beautiful. We've been carrying processing in the vertical as an opportunity in the schedule, and it looks like we will get to realize that opportunity. We've got a production readiness review for the High Bay 2 tool next week, and then we will look forward to the certificate of completion in mid-November. So we are going to do whatever processing in the vertical that we can, including travel work in High Bay 2, using that new tool. So it will afford us some schedule opportunity. But what High Bay 2 really buys you, processing stuff in the vertical as soon as you can is much, much better and more efficient and easier than doing it in the horizontal. So we can do stuff in the transfer aisle and the horizontal, but you've got to rig up platforms to be able to do it, and it's hard to react to whatever contingencies might arrive. So if you've got some out-of-sequence work you have to do, then you have to figure out how to do that in the horizontal. Or if you have to remove and replace something, then you have to figure out how to do that in the horizontal. When you're in the vertical, you've got the platforms already there in situ, so you just walk up and do it, and it's much, much better. So earlier you can do it, that is in High Bay 2, is better than waiting until you get stacked in High Bay 3 and doing it over there. So that's what High Bay 2 does for us, and we're pretty excited about it.
So Boeing and Futuramic are nearing activation of the High Bay 2 facility, possibly in the next few weeks. If that travel work can be done vertically now in High Bay 2, while Artemis II stacking is on hold, then taking care of that work would reduce the list of activities on the core stage to-do list when it is vertical in High Bay 3 after mating to the SRBs. In Jeff Faust's story about Artemis II news, Lori Glaze also reported that Mobile Launcher 1 was ready to begin stacking. I followed up on that with KSC Public Affairs, asking about the status of the stacking checkpoint meeting and what work would be performed in High Bay 3 in the meantime. ML1 rolled back into High Bay 3 in early October, and in a situation where work would proceed without delay, EGS holds a checkpoint meeting to make sure everyone is on the same page and ready to begin stacking the vehicle. That's usually around the time 3 to 4 weeks of preparations are nearing completion. There was some downtime due to Hurricane Milton, but this would be around the time when one would anticipate that checkpoint review. In this case, while the ML might be ready to stack and almost all the SLS hardware is ready to stack, they will be on standby for a while. EGS said via PAO, quote, "As part of the preparations ahead of integration, the mobile launcher will undergo optical scans, umbilical refurbishment activities, and system checkouts. This work will continue throughout the stacking process. Teams will plan to conduct a review ahead of booster stacking in the coming weeks," unquote. So similarly, EGS will use the time while standing by to do operational maintenance work on the ML. The flip side of the Artemis II lack of communication and the 2025 uncertainty is that at the same time, we got a symbolic illustration of progress in SLS production, with NASA and Boeing providing a look at the next 2 core stage engine sections being processed at KSC in the SSPF, which is the Space Systems Processing Facility. In addition to the images that I already went over, KSC Public Affairs also published several still images taken in the SSPF in the last couple of weeks. Boeing moved engine section outfitting or integration from the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans to the Kennedy Space Center and the SSPF, beginning in December of 2022 with the Core Stage 3 unit. Up until July, that Core Stage 3 engine section was pretty much by itself. But since then, NASA and Boeing SLS have delivered a lot of hardware for the next 3 launches. The completed Core Stage 2 was delivered in late July from MAF, and then the Pegasus barge that transported the stage picked up the Artemis II launch vehicle stage adapter from Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, and then the Core Stage 3 engine section bow tail and the Core Stage 4 engine section from MAF. At the end of August, beginning of September, all that SLS hardware arrived at KSC for processing and production. As noted earlier, the Artemis II hardware is on standby mostly, but the new engine section hardware has finally converged on the SSPF. The Core Stage 4 engine section was temporarily stored in the VAB transfer aisle so that the higher priority Core Stage 3 engine section could be mated with its recently delivered boat tail. Steve Wofford noted in the interview on October 24th that Hurricane Milton had set back work in the SSPF by about 2 weeks.
We're down a couple of weeks because of the hurricane, so we lost 2 solid weeks on the hurricane. We didn't have any hardware damage or any facility damage, but it takes several days to secure for the hurricane. Then you're down for a couple of days when the hurricane's doing its thing, and then it takes you a couple of days to clean up and resume operations, and then you turn around and you're down 2 weeks.
That probably kept the Core Stage 4 engine section in the VAB a little longer, but it was transported to the SSPF airlock on October 15th. PAO posted a couple of pictures of the unit taken on October 21st after it had cleared the airlock and moved into the High Bay cleanroom. It was being lifted off of its transportation tooling and moved into Footprint 7, taking the spot that the Core Stage 3 engine section had just vacated. That unit is now in Footprint 5. In this shot, taken on Wednesday, October 30th, we can see that the boat tail fairing is now bolted to the bottom of the barrel. And in this 2 shot, taken inside the High Bay cleanroom on the same day, October 30th, we see both units now being set up to continue integration. The Core Stage 4 engine section is on the left in the foreground, freshly installed in the tooling in Footprint 7. The Boeing integrated product team will pick up with orbital tube welding inside the barrel. The engine section is where not just the propellants are fed to the engines, but also has hydraulic and pneumatic lines. There is also a lot of wiring that needs to be meticulously installed and connected, and that work will pick up too. The Core Stage 3 engine section is on the right in the background after the barrel was moved over to Footprint 5 and the boat tail was mated. That unit is farther into the outfitting process with hydraulic platforms and helium tanks already installed. Work on that unit will continue with joining the lines from the boat tail, finishing the installation of more equipment and more propellant lines, and eventually getting into standalone integrated systems and test. I'll have more with Mr. Wofford about the Core Stage 3 and Core Stage 4 builds in upcoming episodes. But these pictures make it easier to visualize the Boeing engine section work area in the SSPF. Although NASA has not updated the outlook for these upcoming missions, this shot is another illustration that NASA leadership wants to keep pushing towards finishing flight hardware. In the case of future Orion heat shields, that decision could improve the Artemis III Orion delivery schedule and provide more certainty about the Artemis IV Orion build. Here in the SSPF, continuing the core stage engine section builds should do the same for the SLS delivery schedules for Artemis III and IV. If I recall correctly, at some point last year in one of the Federal Advisory Public meetings, one official said, and I'm paraphrasing, "If we have to store hardware, we'll store hardware." The more finished Artemis hardware they have standing by, the more options and flexibility NASA will have to fly Artemis missions. And with the second engine section unit now set up in the SSPF, Boeing is essentially at capacity at that worksite, as they get ready to activate the new worksite in VAB High Bay 2. The challenge for the future is staying at capacity and increasing the tempo of production. If the Core Stage 3 engine section unit were to be completed in 2025, that would create a vacancy for the next unit for Core Stage 5. However, the timing of the next unit is hard to forecast, with production work on that engine section only being approved in the last few weeks. I'll have more on that in upcoming episodes. Speaking of the Core Stage 3 build, in other news and notes for the week, on Friday, November 1st, NASA published a set of stills of the Core Stage 3 liquid hydrogen tank that were taken 6 months ago in May. These show the tank being moved out of Cell P in Building 131, where a coat of corrosion-protecting primer was applied. The tank was then moved next door to Cell N. Cell N is where the spray-on foam insulation will be robotically applied to the acreage of the tank and the two hemispherical domes on either end. But that work to apply SOFI to the LH2 tank was still on hold and is one of the topics I'll return to from the interview with Mr. Wofford. On October 28th, NASA announced that they had refined a list of possible Artemis III lunar landing sites from ones identified and announced back in August of 2022. Looking at the lists side by side, there is overlap between the lunar South Pole candidate regions from 2 years ago and the candidate regions announced this past week. But the new list is shorter and includes areas not on the first list. And these are the slides provided to illustrate the regions 2 years ago on the left and the new list on the right. Eventually there will be further down selects as the mission and the target date of the mission is better refined. And Marshall Space Flight Center published a few pictures of SLS flight and test hardware there during a tour provided to employees on October 24th. In the photos, we see a development test article for the SLS Block 1B Universal Stage Adapter, and then the two Orion stage adapters that will fly on Artemis II and III. The Artemis II unit is in the foreground with its diaphragm and other equipment installed. The Artemis III unit is behind that. Thanks as always for watching. Click on the like button if you found this video informative.